least if you're going to change it, do a different song, which would have been, okay, fine. But playing the same song with a different band doesn't do it for me.
Right. I don't know how you don't hear the complaints about the Sunday Night Football theme song and everything getting changed up. And
I will say,
that.
I'm never going to complain about Carrie Underwood.
Yeah, exactly.
I enjoyed Faith Hill as well, but Miss Underwood does a fine job.
As soon as they messed with it, there were a bunch of complaints. So I don't know.
It's really funny because when Sunday Night Football comes on and Carrie's intro comes on, I always tell my wife it's the best time of the week, and she's like, "Oh, yeah, right. I see. So this is what you've been waiting on." I'm like, "Yeah,
waiting all day for
Sunday night, man." Yeah. No kidding. Speaking of Week 1, in the history of the Beamer era, Week 1's been a little bit shaky, to say the least. I know Eastern Illinois is an FCS team. He beat them 46-0, but they were like legitimately the worst team in FCS over a few-year stretch there. So you really can't take too much away from beating that team like that. But you go the next year, and I wasn't here for this one, but I remember hearing about it. Georgia State, you were down in the third quarter of that game, 14-12. You didn't end up winning that game 35-14, but I don't believe a lot of people were satisfied coming away from that game. 2 years ago, North Carolina, 9 sacks, speaks for itself, set the tone for the entire year. And God, last year was just ugly. Like, we were sitting there watching the game thinking like, oh my God, am I going to have to talk about South Carolina losing to Old Dominion in Week 1? This is awful.
Yeah, Tyler, the only explanation for this is that there's no preseason in college football, right? I think these guys, they're playing against each other or playing against, in inter-squad scrimmages right up until, the big elevated Week 1, season opener. There's going to be, penalties. One thing is one thing you see a lot during Week 1, but also, too, you're going to see some chippiness and you're going to see some sloppy football just because they haven't, done the full game prep. I think, avoiding Week 1 struggles, and every team does it, right? I mean, UNLV was struggling with Idaho State in Week 0. Yep. So, and Stanford lost to Hawaii. So, I mean, it happens. I think, college football certainly could benefit from preseason, but how do you avoid that is, you just can't come out flat. I think this game's elevated, and in Atlanta being on a different day, you really have to preach, not coming out flat and taking every attention to detail as you can.
And we've talked ad nauseum about, man, college football really needs a preseason like every other sport and every other level of football does, because in watching Week 0 really highlighted this. And yes, Iowa State and Kansas State were playing on a wet field, so that had something to do with it, but a lot of sloppy play, miscommunication, dumb mistakes, like when Dylan Edwards, muffed the punt. He shouldn't have been fielding that punt to begin with because he was at like the 7-yard line. Like, you're supposed to let those kind of things bounce, and again, it's those kind of things you want to get out of the way as quickly as possible. So, and again, just given the track record of Beamer teams, I fully expect some pretty rough mistakes, like some things you're like, oh my God, how could they do that? How could they make that mistake? Because it's game 1 and just hit for whatever reason, Beamer teams don't always come out of the gate swinging the strongest.
Right, absolutely. And then, I mean, you're 7.5-point favorites too, so you factor that in. I think all the hype surrounding it also leaves a little bit more room for error for South Carolina because you're coming in expected to win this game. And internally they know that they're preaching that they're getting doubted and stuff like that. But again, I think you just can't come out flat. This Virginia Tech team with so much that's unknown about them, that they could come out and punch you in the mouth.
And I will say, especially on defense, the talent that you lost, all those guys to the NFL, with so many either new faces via the transfer portal or guys that have not played prominent starting roles coming in, I expect communication could be a problem. Again, missed assignments, those kind of things that I don't think is going to be a consistent problem. But for game number 1, that's where you see your blown coverages. That's where you see your missed assignments, those kind of things that if you do too much of it, can let Virginia Tech make this close.
Right, absolutely. And, Week 1 is all about, you can't beat yourself, right? Miscommunications, getting in rhythm. You want to get into rhythm as quickly as possible and know that in Week 1, you're probably going to lose it between quarterback and wide receiver and then defensive backs and the defensive line and linebackers and stuff like that. You're going to lose communication. You're going to have busted coverage early on. It's, how can you recover from that? How can you get things back on track to, limit mistakes and, stay disciplined?
Yeah, and hopefully, again, you don't make as many mistakes to where Virginia Tech is, leading you by 10 points at the beginning of the fourth quarter or something along those lines, because I think from a talent standpoint, Carolina has a better roster than what Virginia Tech has. But again, as we saw last year, if you shoot yourself in the foot over and over and over again and you give them gimmies and free passes and stuff like that, they can make this uncomfortable. And again, this is a Virginia Tech team, as bad as they were last year, most of their losses were one-score games. I think all but one of their losses was in one-score games, so they know how to keep it close. It's finishing that they have a problem with, but you want to put those kind of teams away to where they're not even in a situation where they can jump up and bite you at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And if South Carolina does get to that point to where it's an opportunity to put the game away, you'd like to see them do it. It's something that they did well last year. I guess coming down the stretch, they were able to just put the game away. And obviously Missouri, that crazy game. But after that, they kind of had locked it down as much as you could. And with regards to Clemson. But yeah, I think this team has to you have to check every box again because it's an elevated game too, being at the kickoff game or the Peach Bowl game in Atlanta, and you're also playing on Sunday. So the fact that it's an elevated game, you really have to check every box and make a statement, if you will.
We'll dive into a little bit of what to expect from Virginia Tech and what advantages South Carolina might have coming up next as the halftime show rolls along. He is Joe Machika. I'm Tyler Head. Captain Dave on the other side of the glass producing on your Wednesday on the game. All right, welcome back in. It is the halftime show presented by the Men's Clinic of South Carolina, Tyler Head. Joe Machika and Captain Dave along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. Again, Coach Beamer coming up at the top of the hour, 1 o'clock for his usual weekday press conference. We'll hear a little bit of what he has to say about Virginia Tech as we look ahead of the game. Only 4 days away coming up in Atlanta. Yesterday, Brent Pry spoke to the media out there in Blacksburg and gave some of his thoughts on South Carolina and the matchup this upcoming weekend. Cut number 10 here, Dave. This is Coach Pry talking about how he scouts South Carolina's offense ahead of Sunday.
Yeah, first of all, I think the hype surrounding Lenoir's is accurate. You watch the Clemson game, you watch the Missouri game. I mean, this guy just, whether he's throwing it and certainly doing it with his legs, he's very hard to tackle. He's got great field presence. He's a great competitor, and he's got tremendous size. He's an impressive athlete. And I remember when he was coming out, I believe he was committed somewhere else and flipped to South Carolina. And everybody was kind of curious about what type of player, what type of quarterback he was going to be. But they've done a great job with him. He's a pretty special guy. Obviously, we have to have a plan for him. But I think the whole, they've got a couple of tackles that are returning, which that's when you got both your tackles back, you feel pretty good about that. They went out, they got 7 or 8 transfers on offense in their 2 deep. They're still big in their first group and second group. They got size and experience, when you have a 2 deep at your offensive line like that. And then they got their running back cleared, which I think they had a couple other pretty good ones. This guy's got pretty dynamic film. And then they got, Harbor on the outside, who was a national recruit. They've got players everywhere. And they've helped themselves with some good transfers. So I would think their talent level is one of the best in that league.
So we talk a lot this offseason about, okay, what's the offensive line going to look like? How the receivers going to be? We just now know that Rasul Faison's going to finally be a running back. And regardless of all those questions, when you have 16 at quarterback, you feel confident that you can always rely on him to make magic happen if nothing else is happening around him. We hope that doesn't have to be the case. We hope these other guys step up and play their roles, but you're always capable of doing something great with Lenoir Sellers if it comes down to that.
Yeah, it sounds like Brent Pry's been doing his homework. The fact that, he knows that 16 is an elite level quarterback and arguably one of the best in college football, if not the best quarterback in college football at the moment. He knows that he can break the game, right? And that there's things that, we may not have seen him do yet that he's capable of doing. And so I think he's got his team prepared for it. He also mentioned the progression that the wide receiver room should make this year, and the leap and the bound and Harbor, not necessarily run a track and all the things that he's supposed to become. I think, Pry has his guys, I guess, aware of it. And again, that's the magic of 16 is that you really don't know what you're going to get. So be prepared for everything.
Yeah, and I look at the defense of Virginia Tech, and they got a lot of holes and a lot of things they're trying to, improve on from a year ago, and I feel like those are areas that Lenoir Sellers can exploit either through the air or, with his legs, obviously. And the biggest hope is that your offensive line plays well enough to where he doesn't have to do some of the same kind of magic he did a year ago, where it's like, okay, go out there and avoid 5 sacks in the game and keep the play alive with your feet. You hope he has enough time, sit back in the pocket, let things progress, and obviously make some throws downfield. But that is definitely a wait-and-see kind of thing because, for one, we don't have a depth chart. We don't know who the offensive line is as of right now. And when we do see that on Sunday, obviously got to hope those guys can do their job.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you've heard, at least you have his blind side coming back in Josiah Thompson, left tackle. He's expected to make another progression, and it's somebody that Lenoir can trust. Both tackles are back with Case and Henry.
Yep.
So, there's guys that he can trust in there, and you hope that they make enough of progression, too, to be able to run the football efficiently. Having Rasul Faison back, also helps that running back room with Oscar Attaway, splitting carries up. Hope nobody, gets dinged up, split it around. And so, you hope this offensive line can do both, protect the passer and, have the ability to run the football. So that way, nobody's really doing too much.
I also look at this matchup in terms of what Carolina is going to be good at. You have Sellers, obviously, but you also have the secondary, right? And, yeah, you lose and O'Donnell Fortune, but, Brandon Cisse is expected to slide in to that role. You lose a Nicky Emenawari, but you're going to have maybe a Peyton Williams that did a fine job, filling him. He's not Nicky Emenawari, but he did a fine job filling in for him, and DQ Smith kind of becomes that main number one safety anyway, which you feel like he's got a good shot of playing, hopefully up to the level that Nicky Emenawari did, and he can have his own opportunity to go to the NFL and stuff after this upcoming year. But the secondary as a whole, I feel good about because we know a lot about it, which is something that we can't say for most of this team.
Yeah, I would feel really good about the secondary room. I was talking about that on the walkthrough yesterday. Stephon Gilmore was in the building. Yeah. I feel like that's a good omen for this secondary room.
Rubs off on him a little bit.
Right. Like, he's the guy that started the whole trend, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess, DBs, elite DBs from South Carolina going to the league and establishing themselves as pros. He started it all as this coaching staff has really been talking well about this, the DB room and the secondary. And I think Brandon Cisse, Clayton White mentioned it in his presser last week. He's got the capability of playing nickel too, similar to what Cam Smith was able to do for him. So that should excite you too. There's a lot of depth and a lot of production in this defensive backfield.
And I will say as well, Beamer going into his 5th year now, he's been in a lot of big games, right? Like, if this was game 1 of year 1 and you're playing a Virginia Tech team on the road, neutral side in an NFL stadium in Atlanta, I'd be concerned because I wouldn't know Coach Beamer's big game ability yet. But I think last year proved, and again, they went on that streak where they couldn't beat ranked teams, but last year you got over that hump, beat A&M, obviously beat Clemson at the end of the year, had the crazy last-minute touchdown against Missouri. Like, it didn't seem like there was a moment that was too big for this team a year ago, and I think a lot of that goes to the experience of your head coach that's now been in those situations and environments more and more and more, to where I don't look at this, spotlight game of being the only game on national TV and all that kind of stuff as something I'm like, oh, well, is Beamer going to be able to handle that? Because I feel like he's been able to show that up to this point.
Yeah, absolutely, Tyler. And, we were talking a little bit earlier about week 1 struggles, too. I think, he's learned from a lot of those week 1 struggles. If he can go out and prove a point in this game, I think, that would be another stepping stone for him to put the week 1 struggles, the neutral site kind of struggles, at bay. And so, yeah, I agree. I think it's the fortune of playing in the SEC. You have a tendency to learn very fast. And, if you can win some football games in some tough environments, you can keep your job for longer and continue to build on top of that. And, hat tip to Shane Beamer for being able to do that. He's squashing some of, I guess, skeletons in the closet, if you will, as he's going along and as he's moving along with this momentum.
I would imagine there'd be more Gamecock fans there on Sunday, right?
Yeah, I would think so.
Because roughly 80,000 people, I guess, can fit Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and it's obviously a shorter drive from Columbia to there. You have a fan base that feels a lot better about where their program is compared to VT's, where and I've just been perusing a little bit of, VT Twitter and stuff like that. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of optimism from their side of like, yeah, we can win this game. I think it's like, all right, here comes a team that was almost in the playoff last year. Let's try not to get mauled by 70 points.
Right, yeah, kind of the feeling I'm getting from this Virginia Tech fan base is, a lot of unknowns. Kyron Drones kind of versus everybody. And, I think there's a little bit of optimism to stay in the game, right, to kind of keep it close. But I don't know if there's as much optimism to win the football game, right? And they've struggled to kind of put games away last season, so we'll see.
We'll get into what more of Brent probably had to say, particularly about his own team coming up next. As a preview, South Carolina, Virginia Tech. Again, a game is Sunday at 3 o'clock. You can listen to coverage here on 107.5 The Game, with pregame coverage starting at 10 o'clock that morning with Gamecocks Game Day with myself and Terry Ford. Liney Up's network coverage kicking in at noon all the way up until kickoff at 3 o'clock. It is the halftime show. He's Joe Machika. I'm Tyler Head. Captain Dave on the other side of the glass on your Wednesday on The Game. Tyler right here for the Mortgage Guru, Jacob Crowder, and First Palmetto Bank. If you're looking for a mortgage guru, Jacob Crowder has you covered. He has helped many 107.5 Game listeners and can help you too. And We Eat the Game personally recommend him. Jacob has local decision makers, which means quick and precise processing and underwriting. If you're looking to make a move, give Jacob a call at 803-719-1005 or email him at jcrowder@firstpalmetto.com. Jacob and First Palmetto Bank have products to help home buyers. And if you're considering building a home, they have no-nonsense construction loans that fit your needs. Jacob's MLS number is 198432, and First Palmetto Bank is a member of FDIC and an equal housing lender. All right, welcome back in. It is the halftime show presented by the Men's Clinic of South Carolina. Tyler Head, Joe Machika, Captain Dave hanging out with you here on your Wednesday on the Game. Busy week here on the Game as tomorrow, Jay and Terry are going to be out at Krager Showrooms, formerly known as the Nest and the Vista, for the post-game show from 3 until 6, and then tomorrow night at 7 o'clock right here on the Game in Columbia as well as in Myrtle Beach. You'll be able to hear Shane Beamer on Carolina Calls. Last chance to hear from him ahead of Sunday's matchup against Virginia Tech. And, of course, he's talking today at 1, and quite literally in about 30 minutes, as we'll get his thoughts on VT and all that coming up here in just a couple of minutes. But we're discussing what Brent Pry had to say about his team yesterday when talking to the media. I want to get to a couple of things here. Cut number 3 real quick, Dave. This is Brent Pry yesterday talking about what he's seen out of his team so far this season, or so far these past couple weeks in camp.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. There's 2 things that stick out to me. It's development of some key guys, that you weren't sure are they going to be able to help us or not. We had some guys uptick that I feel better about playing in this first game. And then secondly, you want your schemes, each phase to continue to come together and be closer to game ready. And I think we took steps that way. So I think those are the 2 biggest areas where I think we helped ourselves over the last couple of weeks.
So we talked about Kyron Drones a moment ago, and this is somebody that they're really hoping takes a big step forward this upcoming year. Showed a lot of promise in 2023, dealt with some injuries last year, and really kind of took a step back, but he struggles throwing the ball down the field. And they're hoping that bringing in Philip Montgomery, you can kind of bring more of that out of him. Now, he's athletic. He can use his feet, so that's always going to be dangerous. But I guess kind of one of the biggest question marks going into this game for VT is how much has Drones improved this offseason, and what kind of damage can he do?
Yeah, absolutely, Tyler. They're replacing a lot around him, right? Like, it was almost like his whole offense kind of around him, got separated, got up and left. So, replacing a lot. So he's had to get on the same page with a lot of new guys here in camp. And so we'll see how that goes for him. I mean, really talented kid. Again, they brought a little bit of talent in, but we'll see. I think, South Carolina still holds the edge in terms of the defensive backfield against their wide receivers and backfield.
So one area that he also talked about yesterday that really kind of perked my ears up a little bit is trying to figure out their offensive line. And this will be cut number 4 here, Dave. Here's Brent Pry giving what I'd call a less than ringing endorsement for his front 5 only a few days out from the game. Cut 4.
Yeah, we're still working through, the best 5 and where they play. Tomas has a ton of snaps at guard, and that was a factor in things. I like what he's done at tackle, but I also like what Montavious has done out there. He's got a ton of snaps at tackle. So we got flexibility in that front 5. Where we have to continue to build depth is after Muskrat and after Brody Meadows, we got a bunch of younger guys that we need to have come on. And they're getting better. They're just, they're not where they need to be quite yet.
So this is a team that lost pretty much all of its offensive line starters from a year ago. They went out and got Matt Moore, who's West Virginia's offensive line coach, brought a couple of transfers over, including Tomas, Tomac, who he was talking about there in that clip. But if I'm a VT fan and I hear my coach say that about our offensive line less than a week before game number 1, I'm going to think we're in trouble.
Right, and as you should, because, again, what South Carolina has still coming back on the defensive line. I know you lost against some starters at defensive tackle and then at the other end in Kyle Kennard, but there's still enough of a threat in Dylan Stewart and everything that you're bringing back in Monkel Goodwin, Brian Thomas Jr. To pose a real threat there. So, yeah, if I'm in the Virginia Tech camp and I hear my coach say that, knowing what South Carolina's lining up across from me in that front 7, I would be pretty scared. And
with offensive line, and unfortunately we've had to talk about this a lot in the past couple of years with our own struggles here at South Carolina, it's continuity and gelling that are so important. Because, yes, you can individually be a really good right tackle, a really good guard, a really good center, but if you can't work well within the confines of the other 5 guys, because that unit moves as one, then you're not going to be effective. If this guy's doing this and that guy's doing that, and they're moving in different directions, it's not going to work out. So having continuity, and again, the fact that it doesn't seem like they've nailed down exactly what their starting 5 is. And I'm looking at their depth chart here. They don't have any oars as far as their offensive line for what they put out yesterday. So they have a rough idea of what their starting five is going to be, but it sounds like that could even be interchangeable as the game goes along, depending on who does what and all that kind of stuff. So you're looking at an offensive line that maybe doesn't have quite as many snaps altogether as a lot of other ones around the country would have going into game number one.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is going to be a weak point that South Carolina is going to try to attack, because if you can get pressure on the quarterback, get in the backfield, disrupt any rhythm that this offense is starting to generate, that's how you close the game out, and that's how you leave no doubt, right, is by, sacking the quarterback, throwing him out of rhythm, getting him uncomfortable, and making, tough throws. Eventually he's going to have to heave it and then, let the DBs do what they do.
Because if I'm Dylan Stewart, if I'm Brian Thomas Jr., if I'm Des Yu, if I'm JT Gear, like I hear this and I'm like, okay, this is our game. We're about to go out there and get about to have an big impact. If I'm Gabriel Brownlow-Dinley, if I'm Monkel Goodwine, if I'm, who else on the interior of the defensive line that I'm not thinking of right now? Nick Barrett, obviously coming back. I say, okay, this is my opportunity to go out there and make something happen in game number one, stopping the run, those kind of things that we know this defense was obviously so good at, a year ago. And we'll see. Obviously, it's one thing to say, it's another thing to do it, but I like, at least in the trenches from a defensive side versus an offensive side, I like Carolina in this battle as of right now.
Yeah, South Carolina can set some really, really good habits for their front seven in a game like this, right? If you can get to the quarterback, disrupt the backfield, with handoffs, stop the run. I think if they can continue to do that, throughout the season, obviously, it starts in week one. Yeah. So if you can lay the foundation in week one, I think, it helps build positive habits and again, build those habits rolling on through, and also helps, a room where you're maybe not as deep in linebacker too. So if you can get a push and disruption from, your defensive line, it's going to make a world of a difference.
Now, on the flip side of that, you have South Carolina's offensive line versus the defensive front, the front seven of Virginia Tech, who does have some dudes like Ben Bell that I brought up plenty of times before from Texas State that, wreaked havoc a couple seasons ago before he self-certed himself last year. And one thing that I think we were all hoping to see out of a depth chart yesterday was, okay, who's your starting five? So we have a rough idea, but we don't exactly know. I think we're starting to figure out that Shed Surratt's probably starting at one of the guard spots.
Yep.
But still, this has been a consistent issue in the Beamer era, and until proven otherwise, you're going to naturally assume that it's going to be a problem. So as good as I think Carolina's going to be on their defensive front versus Virginia Tech's offensive front, then I think it's flipped on the other way. Like, I would lean towards being a little bit worried about Virginia Tech wreaking havoc on you on the offensive line.
Yeah, I think the South Carolina offensive line, it's not going to be as bad, say, as Virginia Tech's. I think it helps when you have a true center like Bose Stanley in there, and he's also been here since January. Shout out Jordan Kay, mentioned that on the walkthrough last night, but Bose has been here working with Lenoris, getting that, trust down with his quarterback since, he got here, a couple months ago. So it helps having that, and then also returning your two tackles, as I mentioned, Casey Henry, Josiah Thompson, specifically on the blind side. Like, it helps having them there. And then you're probably going to start a returner at guard too. Yeah. So there's a lot more, I guess, comfortability within that offensive line room that they have with each other this year, I feel like.
And again, it does kind of lean towards Shed Surratt maybe winning one of those guard spots based on, the context clues and him being included on the, Walter Payton Freshman of the Year watch list and all that kind of stuff. You don't get on that list if you're not going to be playing, right? But he'd still be a freshman going into his first year in major college football. There are growing pains with that. Nobody comes out of the gate looking perfect, especially on the offensive line. Now, no spot is easy. Guard spots are not maybe quite as tricky as the tackle spots because you're not dealing with edge rushers, but you also expect some bumps in the road, right? Hey, it's a true freshman. He's got to make some mistakes and all that kind of stuff. Hopefully there's not too many of them in game number one, but I would be as excited as it would be that he did well enough to earn that spot. I'm like, okay, where are the problems going to come in? What's he going to have to learn early in the season to make him better?
Yeah, absolutely. And offensive line's a spot at South Carolina where guys have been thrown into the fire as of recently. I can remember Tree and Tro both making the start at Georgia.
Because they had to.
Right, exactly, because they had to. And they're better offensive linemen because of it. And, before they went through all their bumps and bruises and still stuff that they're kind of, lingering around with those two. But, again, I think it's the nature of being a lineman at South Carolina. Again, I think around Shed Surratt, side. He's going to have a lot more experience, a lot more comfortability with Case and Henry, Josiah Thompson coming back. They kind of know what the drill is.
Right.
So having the two, I guess, edges or the two tackles coming back with some kind of experience is always helpful.
We'll see if we get some clarity on Beamer on the offensive line coming up here at the top of the hour for his Wednesday press conference. But coming up next is wrap up hour number one. A controversial media figure is once again stirring up controversy ahead of week number one in college football. We'll discuss that coming up next as the halftime show rolls along. It's our Joe Machika, Captain Dave, on your Wednesday on the game. All right, welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head, Joe Machika, Captain Dave, along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. Again, Coach Beamer coming up at the top of the hour for his weekly press conference Wednesday this week because you're playing a game on Sunday. And we'll hear from him and get his thoughts on Virginia Tech and all those kind of things. I wanted to hit this, though, before we wrap up the hour. So Dave Portnoy, for those that don't recall, owner and founder of Barstool Sports, is going to be a part of Big Noon Saturday this year, which is Fox's big pregame show. He's essentially their answer for Pat McAfee, right? Like, he is a controversial at times, I'd say more controversial than McAfee, media entity from kind of the social media realm that you're bringing onto TV that they hope can bring in a different subset of viewers that weren't already watching Big Noon Kickoff. We'll see if that ends up happening. But there was controversy yesterday because initial reports said Ohio State had banned him from being on the field for Saturday's game against Texas because he is a UM alum. He's a loud proponent of Michigan football, talked about being a part of getting Bryce Underwood there and all those kind of things. And again, talk about the rivalry between those two. It wouldn't be the craziest thing for them to say, hey, you can't come on our field. However, we've since learned that it was Fox Sports that just isn't going to have him out there. He'll be outside the stadium and that kind of stuff. But nevertheless, once you kind of open the tube of toothpaste here and screams out, hey, Ohio State doesn't want Dave Portnoy on the field, it's hard to get those facts right after that, or just people kind of running with this saying, hey, did you hear that Ohio State's trying to ban Dave Portnoy from the field? And it's kind of taken off a life of its own. Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to that rivalry, of course, the Michigan side is going to, or one side or the other is going to take the other one and run with it as fast as possible. I think, Dave being a Michigan guy, like Michigan will tend to, inflate things, and as does Ohio State. And so, yeah, and considering how big of a personality and ego, I guess, Dave Portnoy is, like, he's going to, blow it up and try to get as many clicks as possible. And, I mean, Connor Stallions was offering him tickets at one point. Sure. Yeah, it's gotten pretty funny, and I almost wonder if this was just kind of like a media stunt by Fox to where they kind of knew this would happen, because guess what? Now you're in line to think, hey, I wonder what Portnoy is going to do. In case you've forgotten, right? Because they announced him to be on Big Noon Saturday a couple months ago, and with everything else going on in college sports, it's easy to get that lost in the shuffle, right? So ahead of, especially considering the fact that Game Day is going to be doing the Lee Corso Farewell, where they're going to get maybe their best show ever in terms of ratings, or at least in a long time, from people that maybe haven't watched in a while. And you know what? I'm going to watch the last show for Lee Corso. You're going to try to do something to steer those viewers away. So as controversial as Dave Portnoy is, if you think he might do something crazy or say something crazy being at Ohio State, this is your way of reminding, like, oh, yeah, he's on that show. Yeah, right. Absolutely, Tyler. And the fact that, like, I mean, we're talking about it, so it's working, right? So, like, I tee it up, and I'm kind of with, like, the WWE almost aspect of it, like, teeing up a little storyline. Yeah, it's fun. We're talking about it. We're still buried kind of almost in week one. Like, we don't have full football, substance to talk about. So, yeah, get the plot lines going. I mean, it's the social media day and age. Why not, try to get as many clicks and eyeballs around it as possible. Are you more inclined to watch? I don't know. Well, what are your, like, Saturday morning viewing habits when it comes to game day college football? Been a game day kid growing up in South Bend. Like, it was always on, and then the off chance that there was a good home game, like, they were usually out in front of the library, and one of my brothers was probably going. But, we had football walkthrough or whatever kind of going on. But, yeah, usually typically always game day. But then with commercial breaks, you flip back and forth. And, I guess with Big Noon Kickoff, my mom always liked watching Brady Quinn, too, on now. And so that's true. You had a connection there that made you want to watch the show. But more or less game day, because, again, just, Lee Corso and all of that. It's the standard, right? Yeah. It's what, and it's been around for 30-some-odd years now. Big Noon Kickoff's only been around for a handful of years, but I can understand Fox trying to do anything they can to try and draw viewers in. And I'm going to be interested to see if Portnoy does actually pull a decent amount of new viewers to that show. Right. And I mean, I guess with this being Corso's last show, ESPN's entering a new era as well with game day. Like, there isn't as much of the wholesome, cheeky kind of mascot heady, feel to it, so it could be an opportunity for Fox to steal some viewers. It certainly could. I really don't think the shift is going to be that crazy because we've been slowly preparing for a Lee Corso-less game day for a while.
Yeah.
He's had his health issues. Again, even the shows that he's on, he's featured very little because, just because of the stroke and stuff like that, he's not able to have the same back and forth they could have years ago. So I almost kind of feel like week 2 won't feel all that weird because, again, we've seen shows without him. We've known this is coming for a while. I really don't think it changes my, desire to watch game day any. Now, I guess I don't know what they're going to do at the end of the show to kind of have that big, hurrah final part of the ending. Maybe you do something with a celebrity picker every single time that is kind of like your send-off.
Yeah.
That'll be the only thing that's different because, again, 95% of the show is going to be the same from what it's been the past couple of years.
Yeah. I think McAfee's going to, call the dogs or something, right? I think he's going to do something, whatever insert chant for a college football team.
Yeah.
Like we saw him call the dogs in Saban's face, at the SEC. I think that is going to be the route that they take. And honestly, it's probably the most logic one, too.
Yeah.
And it could be fun, get you the regional aspect of what, or the local aspect of what of college football is what makes it so special, right?
Maybe McAfee, if he picks the home team, then crowd surfs or something like that. I don't know. Something funny.
There's going to be something cheeky, I guess, to tie in the end of the show. And, I would think they're not going to go too, diving off of the boat or whatever that he was doing.
Which they could, depending on where they're at.
I mean, got a bunch of views, man. That's all that really matters these days.
And, I'm probably not going to watch Big Noon Saturday, but I know if Portnoy says something crazy, it'll get clipped. I'll see it on Twitter, and I'll watch it to that extent and be like, oh, wow, he actually said that or something along those lines.
Right.
Or, oh, they had to censor him on live television, those kind of things. But it's not making me, and again, I'm in the demographic, you too, that they're going for.
Yeah. True. And, I mean, to be honest, I can't stand either of those two teams, Michigan and Ohio State, either of the family. So, it's not.
I've been around Dave Portnoy away from cameras. He's actually like a cool guy.
Right.
You know what I mean? I think he does play it up a little bit, on social media. So he seems fine as average everyday kind of dude. And again, he's got some controversy in his past, no doubt, but it doesn't make me like, oh yeah, I definitely want to watch the show because of that.
Right. Yeah, I don't necessarily know if it's making me switch over from game day simply because of the President game day sets.
Yeah, so we'll see. Joe, thanks for hanging out for the hour, and we'll get you in here tomorrow as well.
Yeah, Tyler, looking forward to hanging out tomorrow again. Should be fun.
Again, Coach Beamer coming up top of the hour as he'll preview Virginia Tech. That's up next here on the game. Oh, Tyler Ed here telling you about our new partners over at Tilly's Warehouse. For over 2 decades, 5 Points in Columbia, South Carolina has lacked the convenience of a local wine and spirits store, but that's about to change with the grand opening of Tilly's Warehouse. Nestled behind the Salty Nut Cafe on Green Street, Tilly's offers a diverse selection of wines and spirits, all competitively priced to match or beat the big box retailers. You can enjoy hassle-free parking and welcoming service as part of your new 5 Points experience. Make Tilly's Time a regular part of your visits. Located in the historic Pavlov's building, Tilly's Warehouse is your go-to destination for quality beverages. Stay connected with them on Instagram or Facebook, or visit their website at tillyswarehouse.com. Discover why Tilly's is your new must-visit spot over in 5 Points. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head, Captain Dave, along with you here on your Wednesday on the game as we're awaiting Coach Beamer taking to the podium coming up here in just a couple of minutes as we'll get his thoughts on Virginia Tech, the battle, the BEAMER Bowl, maybe what Frank's going to be wearing for the game this upcoming weekend. We talked earlier today with Colby Crawford of VT Scoop in 24/7, and I did ask him, like, hey, you know, what would be the outcry if Frank Beamer is wearing a South Carolina shirt or jacket or something in this game? And he said a lot of people probably be upset by that, so maybe we'll get some insight into that, as well as maybe knowing who's going to be starting where, at least in some spots, because, of course, we didn't get a depth chart yesterday when, you know, the game notes came out from Steve Fink and everybody over there on the media side of things. So maybe we'll get some clarification on that from Coach Beamer as well. But excited that we're finally to the point of hearing about an opponent, right? Like we've done these for the past couple weeks, and it's been talking about camp. It's been talking about scrimmages. And, you know, again, Beamer's not going to let a whole lot of information out about those, especially if things are going wrong. We're not going to typically know a great deal about that just because they want to keep things close to the vest. So hopefully this will be the opportunity to, you know, hear some things in terms of who's going to be playing where, starting, that kind of stuff. And obviously take a dive into Virginia Tech as well as, again, that's just not somebody that Beamer's talked a whole ton, a lot about in these past weeks. I feel like Brent Pry has talked more about South Carolina ahead of this matchup than, you know, Shane has had in terms of, you know, Virginia Tech. So, Dave, if you're looking at the same thing as me, I believe he is heading to the podium right now. We're good on that? All right, here's Coach Beamer, press conference right now.
All right, sorry for being a minute late. It's Wednesday for the rest of the world, but it's Tuesday in our world. So trying to pack a lot into a short period of time since we got off the field an hour ago. To reiterate what Steve said, so happy that it's finally game week as well, like we talked to our players about. You work all year for 12 guaranteed opportunities, and we get our first one Sunday as well. Could not be more excited about getting going on that, without a doubt. Obviously excited, a couple things, house cleaning before we get into Virginia Tech. Excited for Rasul. Awesome news that he is free. Huge props and thanks to our compliance office, Aaron Abbey, Angie Ludwig, and John Stevenson. They, along with everyone here at the university, worked really, really hard on this. Appreciate the NCAA and working with us on that one also. So it was a process, there's no question about it, but in the end, had the best resolution for him and what I think was the right thing to do, without a doubt. So really excited for him, and our team is also, and thanks to everyone involved on that one. Update on Travian Robertson, obviously really serious accident last week. Truthfully, he's very lucky to be alive as well. He will not be with us this weekend in Atlanta. He will be back soon. I've talked to him. I've seen him since the wreck, and I've talked to him as well, and he's eager to get back out here and will be as soon as possible. Everyone knows what this place means to him and how much it hurts him not to be here with us right now, but his health is the primary thing, and had some pretty serious stuff happen to him in that wreck. So I'd ask for continued thoughts and prayers for he and his family, but he is going to be okay. It's nothing long term. It's just physically he's not able to be down on the sidelines at a game right now as well. So Jordan Dove, who works closely with our defensive line, is essentially the defensive line coach right now, working with the tackles. Obviously, Sterling Lucas is heavily involved, being that his position lines up next to the tackles. And then we've got a really talented defensive staff, and everybody's responsibilities need to increase in Travion's absence in the short term. This won't be a all-year thing by any stretch of the imagination, but just this week and until Travion gets back. And then we're fortunate that we've got a older group in that room. Nick Barrett's been here as long as I have in this program. Nick Barrett's been in this defensive system longer than Travion Robertson has because he's been here since year one with us. So we've got older guys in that defensive line room. And they'll all do a great job and play their butts off this weekend for Travion until he gets back here with us. Also, want to congratulate all of our NFL guys. That's so freaking awesome that so many of those guys that were on last year's team are now on NFL rosters. And then I talked to every one of our guys that got put on waivers or released yesterday, and except for one of them, and everyone that I talked to last night or this morning, the team has told them that they want them back on the practice squad, and which is great news for those guys. They're all NFL football players, and really excited for them, and a great testament to them and then our program, just their development and what they were able to do here, and then have an opportunity to go be on an NFL roster. Really fired up and excited for them, and then obviously really fired up and excited for this upcoming weekend to be able to compete in the Affleck kickoff game that Gary Stokin over in Atlanta puts on with his team. Anything that they do is first class, whether it be the Peach Bowl or any sporting event that comes to Atlanta, the Peach Bowl Golf Challenge that myself and other head coaches play in the springtime, which is a first-class event. It's going to be awesome. Everything they do is first class, and this event will be as well. Really fired up for George Rogers. He'll be our honorary captain on Sunday as well. Georgia native, Heisman Trophy winner here at Carolina, so I know George is excited about that as well. I know there'll be a ton of fans from Carolina there. Can't wait to see all the garnet and black in the stands. We are doing a pregame walk like we do here in Columbia for home games, so I'm sure we'll post on social media all the details of that, but would encourage our fans to come out and see our guys when we arrive at the stadium a couple hours before kickoff for that walk on Sunday. Obviously playing a great opponent in Virginia Tech. You old heads that have been around here for a little bit will remember that these two teams used to play every year. And my dad became the head coach at Virginia Tech in 1987, and they played in 87, they played in 88, they played in 89, they played in 90, they played in 91 as well. And then South Carolina went into the SEC, and Virginia Tech went into the old Big East Conference that was created back in the early 90s, and then they didn't play anymore. But thought then as a kid growing up that these were two teams that needed to play every year, and it's crazy that we haven't in so long, but it'll be exciting to play against a team that we have a history with as well, and a good football team. This is a team that, in my opinion, last season was much better than their record. If you go back and look at last season, they had 2 3-point losses and a 4-point loss. And I think everybody was watching the Miami game, which I think was one of our off weekends, when they had a really, really controversial finish to that game that easily could have been a win. Had a 3-touchdown lead against Syracuse, and they weren't able to hang on that one. So 2 7-point losses, I believe, a 4-point loss, and 2 3-point losses. And they're on the other side of those. They're a play or two away from being a 9-3 team. And this is a top 15 matchup because of the players they have coming back as well. They dealt with some injuries last season, very similar to what we were in 2023 with some of the injuries and close losses that we had. They got really good players on all 3 phases. They're very well coached. I don't think enough people are talking about Kyron Drones, the quarterback. He's a heck of a talent, and he can make all the throws. He reminds me a lot of Lenoris and his ability to run the ball. He's a quarterback that's able to run the ball, but he's not shying away from contact. I mean, he has a play against Old Dominion last year where he breaks it off for 60, and he's trying to run over people, and defenders are just bouncing off of him. So he makes our offense go, and will be a big challenge for us on Sunday. And then, like I said, well coached, got a ton of respect for Brent Pry. I think the world of him. He was a graduate assistant coach when I was a player at Virginia Tech, and he gets Virginia Tech. And it's real and genuine with him, his love of Virginia Tech, his appreciation for my dad, the kind of person he is. And certainly he's doing a great job with that program, and somebody that I got a lot of respect for. And we're looking forward to competing on Sunday. Questions? Hail. Did you not see David?
I guess he was afraid to ask about the depth chart.
Go ahead.
I guess Dave was scared about the depth chart or asked about it. So I'll ask, will you release one? Will we get to see one, or are we going to have to piece it together on Sunday afternoon?
You'll piece it together. And again, I've got respect for y'all, and I understand you have a job to do, and it's not trying to be any kind of gamesmanship. I called Brent Pry last week, and I told Brent Pry that I was not going to release a depth chart this week because I didn't want him to release one, and then we don't release one, and he's like, what the heck? So I called him last week to tell him that I was not releasing a depth chart. It's not any kind of trying to keep secrets from Virginia Tech. To be totally honest, Hale, I'm just trying to avoid unnecessary overreactions, which is what a depth chart is when it comes out. I mean, we still got position battles going on out there on the practice field. And if I had released a depth chart, it was going to have a gazillion ands and ors on there because that very much is the case at a lot of those positions. So again, I'm respectful of the job that you guys have, and I'm not trying to make things more difficult on you guys, but that's what I was just trying to avoid as I looked at what's best for our team right now. It was not putting anything out on paper. I'm not sure what we'll do on Sunday leading up to the game. I can tell you I think we do it with about 28 minutes left on the clock in pregame warmups. The first offense will come together and run plays against the first defense. So that'll be a great look at it. That gives you a 28-minute head start before kickoff. And then after that, we go down and we kick an extra point. So you'll see our starting snapper, holder, kicker at that point. And then we turn around and we punt. So you'll see the starting snapper, punter, and we punt to the starting punt returner. So you'll be able to knock that off before kickoff as well. And I'm not trying to be a smart, that's truly what's going to happen as well if we don't put anything out before then. But Steve and I will talk about it. But Dabo and Kirby didn't put a depth chart out before this game last year. Everybody survived, the players, the coaches, the teams, the fans, the media, and I'm sure this year will be no different with us as well.
Shane, anybody, updated injury-wise or that might miss the game for a non-injury reason?
No, not at this point. Pretty healthy, nothing new injury-wise other than what we talked about last week, David. And then, a couple guys that are coming back just from some soft tissue injuries, hamstrings, groins, things like that I don't think will keep them from playing on Sunday, but may limit how much they do play. But no, we're in pretty good shape as of today compared to last week.
This first game of the season for every team around the country, there's nerves. It's the first game of the season. You prepare, practice the best you can, and then you just got to play. What's the tone that you want your team and your players to set in this first week specifically?
Yeah, I think we said it a lot last year, and it's the same thing now, just be who we are. And I mean that, like, going into the game and the way that we play. Like, don't all of a sudden start acting different now because it's game week. Players and coaches, be who we are. And in game ones, because it is the first time doing it for real, there's going to be, I don't want to say kinks, but there's things that happen that you got to work out, during the game because it is game one. And just be a team that, plays with great poise throughout the game, no matter what's happening, good or bad. You just continue to play with poise and confidence and then be the team that we want to be just in our style of play and how we execute and the effort, physicality that we want to play with.
With Jordan Dove taking over as defensive line coach, can you explain what the responsibilities of a position coach are in the course of a game and what Jordan will be asked to do?
Yeah. It's obviously most of the work is done during the week from a preparation standpoint in the meetings as you're putting together the game plan for what we want to do. The position meetings that we have. So most days for us is, we have today, for example, we had a team meeting at 8 a.m. and then we had a 20-minute special teams meeting. And then we have about an hour of offense defense meetings before we went on the field. So when we have those offense defense meetings, sometimes it's the whole offense together. Sometimes it's the whole defense together for part of it. But most of the time you're in your own position rooms. So when we're in those own position rooms, Jordan Dove is in there like he is every day with the defensive tackles. And he's talking talking about our game plan and Virginia Tech and whatnot. And then during the game, most of the work is done at that point. Jordan typically is in the press box for us. He does a great job of watching what's happening and being able to convey to Travian and the rest of the defensive coaches kind of what's happening with the offensive line and defensive line during the series. And then really the biggest responsibility is just is the substitutions, which that's something that we talk about as a staff the morning of the game. We'll meet on Sunday morning, and I'll talk to each coach about how are you planning to play the players. And in that meeting, Jordan will talk about, here's who we're starting, and here's kind of what the rotation is going to be, and here's when so-and-so is going in. And then during the game, Clayton's obviously making the calls. There's certain calls where, Clayton may tell Sterling or Travian that he wants some sort of, twist or movement up front with the defensive line, and then he'll let them call it. But those are all things that those guys have talked about during the week, if that makes sense.
Hey, Shane, with Rasul getting cleared, I'm curious, you mentioned the compliance staff earlier. What is that process like for you of working with them through the whole thing? Is it kind of like back and forth communication every day, or can you kind of just take us through it a little bit?
Yeah, it's not much because there's really only so much that I can do. And I knew that our compliance people were working really, really hard. I knew the NCAA had a lot on their plate on top of Sewell's eligibility case as well, and that there were a lot of moving parts. So for me, it was when needed, Aaron or Angie or whoever would reach out to us or reach out to me and say, maybe the NCAA needs this, or do you have an answer for this and whatnot. But very little, I'll be honest. It was just kind of supporting them with whatever they needed and trying to be patient. And certainly you want an answer, and I want to call them every day and say, what have you heard? What have you heard? I didn't that often, but really it's just being able to, support in any way. And they did most of the legwork. And when I say that, it's primarily the statements that we needed to provide, the data that we needed, the records that we needed from other schools and things like that. So, credit Sewell and the way he handled this situation, but then our administration and the way they worked with Sewell and the NCAA to get stuff done.
You mentioned Kyron Drones in your opening statement. That's one thing that you can go back and watch film on because he's been there for a few years. But a lot of position groups on this team are really heavily transfer portal laden. What's kind of the challenge of preparing for them in terms of how they're going to be used, and how have you guys kind of tackled that?
Yeah, it's that's what's hard about game one. I mean, I have like my own process during the week where if you ask me on a normal week, okay, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at whatever time, 9 a.m., 9:40, 10:20, 11:30, 2 p.m., I can tell you exactly what I'm doing between now and the Clemson game, just because it's such a routine every day during the week. But game ones, you get a little bit off because when you're trying to get a feel, unfortunately it's game one, we've had the summertime to do this, but when you're trying to get a feel for their personnel, you're not just watching Virginia Tech. So I spent most of my time on Monday morning watching Texas State, because that's where their best pass rusher just transferred from, and watching a cut up of him, or watching Hawaii because one of their defensive backs just transferred from Hawaii, or watching Rice because their starting safety just transferred from Rice. Offensively, watching a whole lot of West Virginia because they've had players that have transferred in from West Virginia. Watching Wake Forest because one of their top receivers just came from Wake Forest. Watching Tennessee because they got a receiver that's going to probably start for them that came from Tennessee. But then they've also changed numbers. So it's he wears whatever number he wore at the previous school, he's going to be this number. So you're trying to find him on the video. Not to mention you got guys at Virginia Tech, 26 for them is now wearing 0 this year. So it's a lot. And I laugh, but I mean it's serious. It's a lot of just watching other people and trying to get a feel for their personnel, trying to project how they're going to use them within their system. And then you also add the challenge of 2 new coordinators, offensively and defensively, that weren't in college football last year. So we're, it's a lot. You got to be careful that you're not chasing and trying to prepare for everything and then you're not good at anything. That's a big challenge in the first game for sure. So we got to make sure that, we have a good feel for their personnel, but it's always about us though. And I don't mean that any disrespect to Virginia Tech. It's always about us, like what we're doing schematically, how we play and whatnot. But you also, like any opponent, you want to have a good feel for that opponent, their personnel and their schemes.
Doty mentioned earlier how Nick Harbor reminds him a lot of Xavier Legette in terms of his mindset currently. Compared to this time last year, have you seen him grown the most in just how he carries himself?
I think he's having fun for sure. Not that he wasn't last year, but last year when he started practice, it was the first time he had practiced in a year because he was doing track and he's still trying to learn everything. He was trying to develop that relationship with Mike Furry, a new receivers coach. So I think he's much more at ease now in a lot of ways because he went through spring practice and he went through the summer. So I see him having fun. And then really, I just say the fundamentals of the position, of running routes, how to get open, how to block, catching the ball, running after the catch. He's just so much farther along. Still has a ways to go, but he's so much farther along from last year at this time to now just because he's spent more time at football.
Hey, Shane, when Luke was in here, he talked a little bit about his relationship with Lenoris and how he tries to help him out. How valuable is that to you as a coach to have a kid who's been around here for so long just to be able to share his knowledge and experiences?
Yeah, huge. Anytime you have a older team, veteran team, it helps. We had that last year, Rick, with so many guys. This year, we don't have as many older guys, and I was just meeting with some of the players on our team, and we were talking about the 2021 season, and Luke was here, and Nick Barrett was here, and Bradley Dunn was here, but there weren't a lot of other guys that are leaders, if you will, on our team that were here then. So to be able to say that, to have a guy like Luke and some of those older guys that they've seen everything, and no matter what happens on Sunday or at any point this season, it's not going to be anything that they probably haven't already experienced as a player here, good and bad, on the field. But especially with Lenoris, that he has a guy like Luke that he can talk to him and help him. Luke, one, being a talented player, but just a great person, great leader. They sit next to each other in those quarterback meetings, and there's communication going on back and forth. And I just think he's a great resource for Lenoris in the meetings, on the field, between series. And, Luke has a really valuable role on this team.
It seems like when waiting on a decision for someone like Rasul Faison, it can be draining mentally to a certain extent. So describe the flip side. When you get that call, you get that email, he's cleared. What does that do for the team, the room, and how much more dynamic is that group with him back in the fold?
Yeah, it was awesome. You're optimistic, but until you hear, you don't know. And this week it was getting to be crunch time, obviously, because it's game week and you need an answer one way or another because you're getting ready for a game literally during that week. I was really proud of Sewell, how he handled this whole situation, and it never, if it affected him, he never showed it. He was the same guy each and every day and just went out there and worked and got better. That was a awesome phone call to make. Aaron Abbey called me and told me that we got word that he was cleared and that I could let Sewell know. And it was, what day was that, Monday? And he was at home already in the afternoon, so I FaceTimed him and told him, and that was a pretty cool moment that I won't forget, just seeing the joy in his face, and all he kept saying was just thank you, thank you, thank you, because he's so appreciative for the opportunity. He came and saw me yesterday just to thank me again as well, which is awesome. So that was a really special moment and a lot of emotions. And then certainly it makes a room that was already good, in my opinion, even better. And I told you guys, I believe last week that, or I know I've said it publicly, that whether Sewell was eligible or not, we were going to play multiple running backs. And now that he's eligible, he's going to play. And then there'll be other guys in that room that will also play. So it makes a room that I was really excited about already. It makes that room even better and gets me even more excited to just add to the depth and the personnel in that running back room.
Last week, Mike Shula said that more receivers, particularly freshmen, might be able to get into the game than he would have initially expected. Do you agree with that assessment, and do you have any estimate of how many of those freshmen might see the field Sunday?
Indirect depth chart question right there. I'll see what you did there. Yes, I would agree with what Mike said on that one. When we signed those receivers, what did we sign? 7, I think. When we signed those freshman receivers, we signed them with the intention of getting them ready to play early. And they've come in, going through spring practice was huge for them. Everybody went through the spring except Donovan Murph, but he was basically out there every day during spring practice. And now that we've gone through the preseason, they've just continued to get better. They still have a ways to go, but they're dynamic players that are really going to help us. We've got a really good receiver room already with some of those other older receivers. But yeah, absolutely. I think you'll see a small group of them that are going to play a lot on Sunday, and I would say that there's a chance that you see all of them play a little bit on Sunday.
I know we'll learn on Sunday, like you said at the beginning, who the specialists are, but kind of just going off that, you know, where are you at right now with special teams? Do you feel like you have an answer in your mind as to like the questions you had about that group coming in with who you want to see start?
I'm a lot closer than what I was on August 1st when we started practice. Just to be completely honest, I wish we had kicked a little better today and Monday, Sunday, whatever day it was, Sunday in the football world, Monday in the real world. Not that we were bad, but, you know, being a perfectionist, you want to hit everything and confident in those guys as we get into Sunday, without a doubt. But we've come a long way. They've all improved. I like where we are on special teams, not just punters, kickers, snappers, but coverage units, return units, all that. It's a big point of emphasis for us, and we need to be really good at it on Sunday. And we've got quality, talented guys, don't get me wrong, more than one at each position. When I talk about the punter and the kicker and the kickoff person as well, just want to see more and more consistency all the time from those guys, and confident that we will.
I know uniforms this time of year are always very low on the list of priorities for you, but what have you heard from players, maybe recruits, even with the Nike news from last week?
A lot of excitement. Certainly grateful for our partnership with Under Armour for so many years. And they've been a great partner and a great friend to Carolina Athletics, and will continue to be over the next year until that contract runs out. But the response from our team and the response from recruits has been really, really, really positive as well. You know, it's something that has come up with some recruits that we're recruiting right now. Hell, like during the recruiting process, that was one of the questions in my office with some recruits on official visits, was what the apparel contract looks like going forward. And to have it resolved, appreciate Nike. I mean, they wanted us. Appreciate Jeremiah, Jeff Crane, and the rest of our administration for their communication and getting this done without a doubt. So I think it's a great day for South Carolina, and most of the all the players I know and the recruits that I know feel the same way.
Well, I guess I'll try my hand at a direct depth chart question. How many, if you could tell us, starting positions are still up for grabs?
Well, competition is a core value of our program, and we say we compete every day, so all of them, okay? I'd be a hypocrite if they weren't. That's just the case. Now, is it going to be hard for somebody to beat out Lenora Sellers as the quarterback? Yeah, probably so, but we're competing each and every day in practice. All right, Carolina calls on Thursday night, Backstreet. Saw Jack there last week, so expect more attendance this week from everyone in here as well. See you.
All right, there you go, Coach Beamer with his pre-Virginia Tech press conference. We'll come back and react to some of the things that he said as the halftime show presented by the Men's Clinic for South Carolina rolls along on your Wednesday on The Game. All right, welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head, Captain Dave, along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. Of course, you just heard from Coach Beamer there in his weekly press conference, and we'll get into some specifics of the things that he said coming up in just a moment. But as he alluded to, you can hear from him once again tomorrow night right here on the game in Columbia, as well as Myrtle Beach on Carolina Calls at 7 o'clock. And then, of course, game day is Sunday. Pregame coverage starting at 10 o'clock Sunday morning with myself and Terry Ford for Gamecocks game day. And we'll take you right into network coverage, which begins at noon. That takes you straight up to kickoff a little after 3 o'clock from Mercedes-Benz Stadium there in Atlanta as the Gamecocks and the Kokies square off for game number 1 for the 2025 season. So Beamer touched on a number of things there, just kind of looking over my notes, and, of course, gave an update on Traven Robertson, which is the first that we've heard since over the weekend when he was involved in that scary, car accident that unfortunately did claim the life of the other person that was involved in the car that apparently crossed the center line and hit, Coach Robertson head on. But it does sound like that he will, make a recovery and be back on the sidelines, hopefully before too long. But did say that he's not going to be going to be on the sidelines this upcoming weekend. Jordan Dove, the defensive line assistant, is going to be the one there. And again, you're going to have Sterling Lucas and Clayton White and all those guys assisting there, kind of, filling that role that Traven Robertson is leaving open as of right now. But again, he's going to come back soon, it sounds like, which is good to hear because, as Beamer alluded to, those are the kind of accidents that can unfortunately end up extremely tragic, which again ended up being the case for the other party involved there. But thankfully, Coach Robertson's okay and hopefully healing up. Again, I can't imagine the aches and pains and broken bones or whatever he might be dealing with right now. But certainly looking forward to him getting back on the sidelines here before too long. And it seems like things are going to be in good hands this upcoming weekend. And you have guys in that room that have obviously spent the entire offseason working with T-Rob, and I'm sure, the development and coaching has been drilled into their heads at this point, so I don't think it's going to be anything as far as too much of a deviation from, what they've been doing. It's just kind of letting all these guys, fill in the gaps a little bit while he's away, and again, looking forward to him coming back here, hopefully very, 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 very soon. Beamer was asked about the depth chart, as you would expect, and he as he said, sympathizes with the people like us and written media that have a job to do in terms of trying to figure out who's playing where and all those kind of things. But at the same time, it's something that Coach Beamer said for internal reasons and not trying to create the create assumptions about things based on what the depth chart would look like when it came out. It's, part of the reason why they decided not to release it. He even said that, he called Brent Pry last week, I guess it was, and said, hey, I'm not putting out a depth chart. You don't have to put one out either, which Brent Pry did. Virginia Tech did indeed put out a depth chart to, give Carolina some idea of what their team's going to look like. But Brent Pry, knew well ahead of time that South Carolina was not going to be returning the favor in that front, and I guess they were okay enough with that to still put out their own, and we have an idea of what VT's lineup is going to look like, but South Carolina's is still a bit of a mystery. He did also say that, if you're at the game on Sunday, particularly for the media, roughly about 30 minutes before kickoff, I think 28 minutes specifically, is when they start going through their drills, where they start splitting things up depending on who's starting and who's not. So you'll get to see before kickoff who is your respective starters at every spot. And again, that wouldn't be enough time for Virginia Tech to obviously craft some kind of new game plan or something like that if somebody new is out there in a starting spot that isn't expected. So hopefully that's something that plays advantage for South Carolina. Again, we want to see things like depth charts from the content purposes of, learning more about this team ahead of game number 1. But again, that's something that could potentially play into South Carolina's favor in terms of not having all that information out there and giving VT some questions on who to prepare for what to prepare for and those kind of things. Most spots, I feel like we can kind of figure out if we piece things together well enough. Again, Sellers, he's your starting quarterback. There's no debate about that. We didn't need a depth chart to figure that one out. But Faison's going to play at running back, and you're going to see Oscar Attaway. You're maybe going to see Isaiah Gustave, and to be determined if you'll see as deep down as like a Jordan Howell or a Matthew Fuller or something along those lines. At receiver, Nick Harbor, Jared Brown, Mazeo Bennett, and then just a wide open door for however many freshmen to get on the field and see if they can make some kind of impact right away. Tight end, Brady Hunt, Jordan Dingle, Michael Smith, like a lot of guys that, and again, those are spots you rotate through and have multiple guys playing there that we expect to see coming up on Sunday. I would assume Brady Hunt's maybe your first tight end once you actually get onto the field for play number one. But after that, you can obviously cycle through and have multiple ones on the field at a time and those kind of things. It's really the offensive line, right, where we've had the biggest question mark in terms of who's going to be your starting five there. And we've been able to piece together a pretty good idea. And Beamer said this, as well, coming away from spring ball, that, hey, Boaz Stanley is your starter coming out of spring, or however he phrased it. So that's pretty confident there. Left tackle, also something Josiah Thompson that is, it seems like a pretty open and shut kind of thing. You look at the other spots, though, and that's where things become a little bit more of a question. Like, okay, is it, Cason Henry again at right tackle, or is Tree Babalade potentially going to take that spot at the guard spots? And again, we go back to yesterday while doing this show, myself and Jack were looking at, like Steve Fink's Twitter account, waiting for him to drop the depth chart, which didn't end up being what we thought it was. But, he puts out the tweet about, or retweets the thing about Shed Surratt being named to the Walter Payton, potential freshman of the year list, right? And you don't end up on one of those lists if you're not going to play, or if you're just going to be playing on special teams. Like, that's kind of your glimpse behind the curtain a little bit that, hey, there's a good chance Shed's right. And it's not a foreign thing. Like, Wes Mitchell, talked about it earlier on in our show this morning out at Firehouse Subs, that this is something they've been tracking for a while, that Shed Surratt has been impressing a lot, right? To where he could potentially be one of those stars at the guard spot. Is Trevon Ball at the other one? Is Nick Sharp, Marquis Anderson? There's a lot of names that factor in there. And as Beamer alluded to, even if they would have put out a depth chart, there would have been a lot of ors. So I imagine those guard spots would have potentially been those ors, going into the weekend, as, again, they're trying to finalize those, those positions, as well as a lot of positions around the team going into, game number one. But we'll find out on Sunday, trotting out for the warm-ups 28 minutes before the game starts, as well as obviously drive number one offensively and defensively in terms of, who's going to be playing where. And we'll obviously go from there. But as far as right now goes, we can still speculate at some of those spots. And really, again, offensive line was kind of the one that I think I had the biggest question mark about, because I think most of the defense is pretty straightforward. Okay, who's going to be the first edge opposite Dylan Stewart on the first play? But again, that's a spot you'll rotate through a lot of guys with. So even that is not something quite as pressing as offensive line, where ideally on the offensive line, you would have nothing but the same 5 guys the entire year, assuming everybody can stay healthy and all that kind of stuff. Certainly hope that is that's going to be the case. But we'll have to wait for Sunday to find out, who the starters are for South Carolina and all that. We'll come back. We'll wrap up hour number one, and we'll try and get a little bit more of what Coach Beamer had to say, as well as some other things happening around the college football world, as the halftime show presented by the Men's Clinic for South Carolina rolls along here on your Wednesday on the Game. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head and Captain Dave along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. Again, Coach Beamer speaking a little bit earlier in the hour. We'll try and get some of those cuts from that presser coming up in the top of the 2 o'clock hour. Also, going to be talking to JC Shurburt of the Big Spur today from 2:15 until 2:45, as we'll be checking in with him during the week, during football season as well. But first, it's a very busy weekend on a lot of fronts, not only with college football getting rolling, but also with NASCAR making its return to the Darlington Raceway for this weekend's Cookout Southern 500. And as part of this weekend, you also have the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series Sober or Slammer 200 coming up Saturday afternoon at 12 noon. And we do have some tickets to give away for that, but you do have to answer a trivia question correctly first. So, by the way, the number to call as always is 803-404-6100. And our trivia question, again, first caller to get this right, we'll actually have 2 pairs of tickets. So, first 2 callers to get this right will win a pair of tickets to Saturday's NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series Sober or Slammer 200 from Darlington Raceway. Is with the NASCAR playoffs starting this weekend, how many drivers are in the field at the beginning of the NASCAR playoffs? I'm talking about the field of the playoff drivers. I know all 40 cars still start the race on Sunday. How many drivers are involved in the NASCAR playoff field? Give us a call, 803-404-6100. If you get the answer right, you can win tickets to go see the Sober Slammer 200 by the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series this weekend at Darlington Raceway. I wanted to poke around a couple other things happening around college football, including the news that came out in the past day around Josh Heupel and the Tennessee Volunteers. He's been extended through the 2030 season after getting off to a really strong start in his time out there on Rocky Top. Obviously was able to help get the team to the college football playoff for the first time in the program's history, as Heupel is entering like Shane Beamer, his 5th year as a head coach. And you've seen a lot of success and a lot of progress out of them through the first couple of years. And much like Coach Beamer was 7-6 in year number 2, took a massive, or 7-6 in year number 1, took a massive step forward in year number 2 with that team that won the Orange Bowl. Of course, South Carolina ended up crushing their dreams in terms of, making the college football playoff. A little bit of a dip the year after that, going 9-4 and, playing the Citrus Bowl. And then last year, obviously being good enough to win or make their way into the college football playoff, beat Alabama once again in the process, and all that kind of stuff. So Tennessee is definitely in a very good spot right now. They want to make sure that Heupel stays around for the long term. And I do think it's interesting. It's good that they did that from a Tennessee standpoint, because there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding the Oklahoma football program right now, right? Brent Venables, it's been talked about plenty, we've talked about it plenty, is not exactly sitting very pretty right now out there in Norman, and there is a possibility that if this season goes sideways, you could be looking for a new head coach of the Oklahoma Sooners. Well, who quarterbacked the Sooners on a national championship team 25 years ago? None other than Josh Heupel. And I imagine Tennessee looking at the horizon saying, hey, there could be a possibility, and here's the thing, Oklahoma is not hurting for money. There could be a possibility where Oklahoma can make a real hard charge for their, prodigal son, the alumni quarterback, to make a return as their head coach. So this is Tennessee's way of trying to prevent anything like that from happening, getting Josh locked down in the long term, and for them, hopefully continuing to, have success. And I think it's so significant, right? Because we always think of Tennessee as just one of these premier programs of college football. And again, they are now back in that conversation of one of the better teams in the SEC. And when you make the playoff, you're one of the better teams in college football. But for the longest time, they were in the doldrums, right? They were towards the very bottom of Power 4. They were towards the very bottom of the SEC, or a far cry away from the success of the late 90s with national championships and all that kind of stuff. Peyton Manning, T. Martin, quarterbacks like that. Even, the later former years in the early 2000s were very strong, going to SEC championship games and playing in good bowls and stuff like that. But in the years since, you had the promising year from Lane Kiffin, and then he dipped and went to Southern Cal. But, Derek Dooley and Butch Jones, obviously the Jeremy Pruitt thing that ended up being a colossal failure. Now you finally landed on Josh Heupel, and it does seem like things have stabilized, are consistent, and all those kind of things. I am very intrigued to see what this upcoming season looks like for Tennessee after the fall of the Nico Iamaleava situation, which I think endured, which I think helped even more people support Josh Heupel. I mean, we hear, from an outside the bubble perspective of Knoxville, we're saying, yeah, good on you for not letting, one player be bigger than the team, right? And that was the message: hey, nobody's bigger than the T, or whatever he said back in the spring. And could they go through some pains this year by not having Nico and having Joey Aguilar at quarterback? Maybe. I do think that's a unique offense that a lot of guys have been able to fit in, and we'll see if Joey Aguilar is able to do that, and if that means more success for Tennessee this upcoming year. And I'm assuming Carolina's going to see them next year, since you haven't seen them the past 2 seasons. And again, Josh Heupel not going to be going anywhere anytime soon with that extension running through 2030. 2 hours in the book of the halftime show. Coming up the next hour, we'll dive back into what Coach Beamer had to say, as well as talk to JC Shurburt of thebigspur.com. It is the halftime show presented by the Men's Clinic of South Carolina. Tyler Head and Captain Dave along with you on your Wednesday on the Game. All right, welcome back in. It is the halftime show presented by the Men's Clinic for South Carolina. Tyler Head, Captain Dave, along with you here on your Wednesday on the game as we are inching ever closer to the start of the college football season with Carolina and Virginia Tech on deck for Sunday over at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And it is, of course, a very, very busy week here on the game. Tomorrow, Jay and Terry going to be live at Krager Showroom, formerly known as the Nest over in the Vista, from 3 until 6 during the postgame show. You'll hear from Coach BEAMER once again tomorrow night, as you actually heard him say at the end of his press conference there, when it comes to Carolina calls at 7 o'clock, which you can listen to on the game here in Columbia, as well as the game out in Myrtle Beach. And then Friday, the Schroeder Sterling Road Show is going to be out there for the early game and the extra point, as we're going to be broadcasting live from Darlington Raceway from 6 a.m. until noon, getting you set for not only a college football weekend, but Cookout Southern 500 weekend as well, as we just, in fact, gave away a few tickets there at the end of the last hour to a couple lucky listeners for Saturday's NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series Sober or Slammer 200 at the Darlington Raceway. And we'll have some more tickets to give away a little bit later on in the show as well. And on Friday, you're also going to have Jay and Terry from Columbia Craft on Green Street in the Vista as they get you set for Friday with Tailgate Show there. And then lastly, before we head into the weekend, you've got the Cotman Transmissions High School Scoreboard Show with Elijah Campbell and Justin Hall as they discuss all things high school football across the state of South Carolina, as I believe we're officially entering week 1 this week. I know last week was week 0, and you had some games that got pushed around because of weather, but I believe everything's back to normal in week 1, going on as expected coming up here this weekend. We'll get back into what Coach BEAMER had to say here in just a second, but I do think it's interesting. We look at this game on paper against Virginia Tech, South Carolina, depending on what services you're looking at, a basically 7.5 point favorite here, right? And we look at the rosters and what we expect the depth charts to be, and I'd say South Carolina has a really good chance at winning this game handily, right? And I won't spoil my score prediction quite yet that you can hear about on Friday and read on GamecockCentral.com, but I think Carolina is going to win this game by a couple scores. I feel pretty confident saying that because I believe in what this team has, and I just don't know enough about Virginia Tech on the other side to say with a lot of confidence they're going to be able to do this or that and give South Carolina consistent problems. I will say that week 1s have been pretty rough for Coach BEAMER and company. In the 4 prior seasons, week 1 has always stuck out as a problem game. Now, they've only lost one of those. That was to North Carolina back in 2023, and that was, of course, the game that, Spencer Rattler got sacked 9 times in, which we didn't know at the time, but that was going to be setting the tone for the consistent problems throughout the entire season for South Carolina. But you look at the other games in 2021, you had Eastern Illinois, and again, they were just a god-awful FCS team. So you couldn't really glean a whole lot from that. But in 22, you played Georgia State, and that was a team that had a lead on you in the third quarter, and Carolina ends up pulling away and winning by 3 touchdowns, but it didn't feel like that at the end of the game. Mentioned the 9 sacks against North Carolina, and last year, your offense couldn't get in gear at all, right? You were helped out by key takeaways by your defense at the beginning of and end of that game to help South Carolina get the victory. Now, of course, we know BEAMER teams click things into gear and get things rolling as the season goes along, and thankfully are playing their best football once the month of November rolls around. But when you start off the season this way, not only against a Power 4 opponent in Virginia Tech in week number 1, but having 4 of your first 5 opponents be from the Power 4 ranks, that's concerning. Just given the track record of this program, past handful of years, and how they start the year. Again, in the BEAMER era, they have won 2 games against Power 4 teams in the first month of the season. Mississippi State 2 years ago and Kentucky last year. And again, their first couple years, you were playing the likes of Georgia and stuff like that, so that certainly did not make it easy. But still, you're taking on, 4 of your first 5 opponents being from the Power 4 ranks. So it's not something they're used to doing. And hopefully they come out the gate stronger. And my biggest thing is just don't make silly mistakes, right? Or don't make too many silly mistakes. Because, again, it's week one. You're going to have jitters. You're going to have bumps and all that kind of stuff. So I expect some things to be a little bit wonky, but don't give Virginia Tech a bunch of short fields. Don't turn the ball over in the red zone to prevent yourself from scoring. Those kind of things that, if they add up, can be extremely detrimental to South Carolina, coming up this weekend. And a lot of different ways to look at this. But let's hear Coach Beamer, cut number 2 here, Dave. Let's hear Coach Beamer giving his scouting report of Virginia Tech ahead of Sunday's matchup.
But it'll be exciting to play against a team that we have a history with as well, and a good football team. This is a team that, in my opinion, last season was much better than their record. If you go back and look at last season, they had 2 3-point losses and a 4-point loss. And I think everybody was watching the Miami game, which I think was one of our off weekends, when they had a really, really controversial finish to that game that easily could have been a win. Had a 3-touchdown lead against Syracuse, and they weren't able to hang on that one. So 2 7-point losses, I believe, a 4-point loss, and 2 3-point losses. And they're on the other side of those. They're a play or two away from being a 9-3 team, and this is a top 15 matchup because of the players they have coming back as well. They dealt with some injuries last season, very similar to what we were in 2023 with some of the injuries and close losses that we had. They got really good players on all 3 phases. They're very well coached. I don't think enough people are talking about Kyron Drones, the quarterback. He's a heck of a talent, and he can make all the throws. He reminds me a lot of Lenorse and his ability to run the ball. He's a quarterback that's able to run the ball, but he's not shying away from contact. I mean, he has a play against Old Dominion last year where he breaks it off for 60, and he's trying to run over people, and defenders are just bouncing off of him. So he makes our offense go, and will be a big challenge for us on Sunday. And then, like I said, well coached, got a ton of respect for Brent Pry. I think the world of him. He was a graduate assistant coach when I was a player at Virginia Tech, and he gets Virginia Tech. And it's real and genuine with him, his love of Virginia Tech, his appreciation for my dad, the kind of person he is. And certainly he's doing a great job with that program, and somebody that I got a lot of respect for. And we're looking forward to competing on Sunday.
The close losses is something that's been brought up a lot when talking about Virginia Tech this offseason. He's right. I mean, pretty much all their games were tight losses, and they were, as Carolina said, a lot last year, only a handful of plays away from being a lot better than they were. So you have a team that's not like they were getting blown out left and right every single game, and yeah, the personnel and stuff on the field's changed a lot, but there is something about a team that always can keep it close that does scare you. And when you look at this being a week 1 matchup, and as I mentioned a moment ago, you're going to have mistakes, things that just from not playing real football in almost a year, and yeah, you can scrimmage and all that kind of stuff. It's different when you're going up against a team and players that you're not looking at and practicing with every single day that elicit some of those mistakes, happening early in the process. So I'm interested to see, hopefully, South Carolina not make too many of those mistakes to where, hey, it's a tight game, and then boom, you have a costly turnover when you're, backed up on your own 20 or something like that, and boom, Virginia Tech's got a short field, and oh no, now they're setting up for the winning score or something along those lines. It's avoiding those kind of things that I think is going to be very important. And he alluded to Kyron Drones as well, and we've talked about him a lot in this offseason in terms of, how he's struggled at quarterback, right? In 2023, looked promising. 2024 took a bit of a step back, dealt with some injuries and stuff like that, and they bring in a guy in Philip Montgomery that's expected to get more out of him. But as Beamer also alluded to, you can see some Sellers-type elements in Kyron Drones' play, right? I'm not saying they're the exact same player, but that athleticism, that ability to run, when the play breaks down, that's always there. And that's something you do have to account for this game coming up this weekend. And when I think about how many new guys are being on defense, right? When you had your sure tacklers in the middle at linebacker with Debo, Demetrius Knight, Bay Martin Scott, you had as Preston Thorne likes to call him, the eraser on the back end at safety, Nicky Minori, that can clean up anything that gets to that second level of the defense, as Coach Beamer just wants to interrupt me there. That you have that guy in the back end that can clean up things that you're not sure about right now. Now, I think DQ Smith can step into that role and do a really good job, but Nicky Minori was Nicky Minori for a reason. He was extremely special, and that's why he was darn near a first-round draft pick. So, a quarterback with the abilities of Drones does worry you a little bit, especially if, again, talking about game number 1 and mistakes and those kind of things. If, you miss an assignment or something like that, you don't want him to pay for it. And I think we're all intrigued to see how much better of a passer he's become. That's something that Kyron Drones has struggled mightily with in his career. You look at his numbers of throws, 20-plus yards down the field, the explosive play type throws, and he's awful, right? He's never been able to consistently do that. Is that something that Philip Montgomery could get out of him this offseason? Is there enough time in the offseason to turn him to that kind of guy? We don't know. Not to mention the fact that he's basically replacing his entire receiving core, entire running back room, and entire offensive line. We don't have really a lot of pure knowledge of this offense from Virginia Tech outside of what Kyron Drones brings to the table. But again, as a quarterback, depending on the pieces you have around you, that drastically alters your ability. And their offensive line could be awful. And Dylan Stewart and Brian Thomas Jr. are just teeing off on those guys all day long, and it's not a factor. Or maybe they hold their own. Maybe that group they do put together as their starting 5 goes out there and does an incredible job and wreaks havoc and all that kind of stuff. And, you hold Carolina's pass rush at bay, and Kyron Drones has the ability to wait in the pocket all day and throw and run and all those kind of things. So we just don't really know. But obviously, and I'm sure this hasn't been a problem, given, again, the struggles they've had in game number 1s in Beamer's tenure so far, you just can't overlook them, right? You can't get too confident, can't get too ahead of yourself and saying, yeah, we should definitely win this game because we just have better players and our roster's better and all that kind of stuff, which, again, I think is true of South Carolina, but you can't let that mindset slip in if you're obviously suiting up or coaching for them, across the street. So it's going to be fun. Should be an interesting game, and hopefully Virginia Tech's not able to keep it close, and Carolina can minimize the mistakes and be able to walk out of Atlanta with a victory to start the season, which would obviously be really good and get you off and rolling for what can hopefully be just as good, if not better, of a season than 1 year ago. I got JC Shurburt of thebigspur.com. I'm going to be checking in with him each and every week going forward, and he'll join me on the AAA Heat and Air phone line coming up next as we get you set for South Carolina Virginia Tech in game number 1, only 4 days away on the halftime show presented by the Men's Clinic for South Carolina here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head and Captain Dave along with you here on your Wednesday on the game, counting down until South Carolina and Virginia Tech coming up on Sunday. And as we'll be doing each and every week going forward as the season rolls along, talking to our guy, JC Shurburt of the BigSpur.com. Joining me now on the AAA Heating and Air phone lines. JC, appreciate you taking your time. Hopefully the summer was good, and I know, like all of us, you're ready to finally see some on-the-field action instead of just talking about this team all summer.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's always good. You know, I think when I was a kid, I used to really be excited about Christmas, and the week before Christmas was very slow. Now that week goes by pretty quick. It's this week that it's pretty slow for me, just because I'm always looking forward to a new college football season, especially, you know, this year with the Gamecocks being, you know, ranked 13th in the country, having some really good players, high expectations, a national stage for an opener in Atlanta. I mean, it's there's a lot of reasons to be pretty fired up, really beyond the normal, just usual excitement that comes along with the start of a new season.
Well, and the excitement ticked up even a little bit more now 2 days ago when we learned about Rasul Faison being granted his eligibility. And this is something that, unfortunately, we've been following all off season long, basically going back to January when he got on campus with little to no information, will he or won't he, and then kind of out of the blue earlier on this week, we finally get the thumbs up. So from your perspective, what's this saga looked like? How have we gotten to this point, and were you surprised that the ruling came down when it did?
I was, you know, you're always kind of wondering about the NCAA whenever they make decisions like this, because, I mean, I kept thinking back to the receiver that under all circumstances should have been eligible for North Carolina a couple of years ago, and he ended up getting eligible. I mean, basically their COVID rules at the school he was at wiped out an entire season. They were holding that against him. He ended up getting eligible, but he was out for the game of the Gamecocks. Didn't matter in that ball game. But, you know, so you just never know. Now, a couple of weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, you started kind of getting the sense that things were going to be okay with Faison. So I personally wasn't really sweating it. I just, you know, and then when Coach BEAMER explained that it was a situation where they were just kind of in line, and I was at the deli at the grocery store the other day, took a number like you do, and they got 6 people working back there, and only one of them's slicing sandwich meat and working the chicken and the potato salad and all that good stuff. And you just wait and wait and wait and wait and wait, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's kind of how I envisioned it happening in Indianapolis. It was just they had a lot of cases, and they had to get back around to it. And once they did, he was eligible. And if there was any justice in the world at all, I mean, you're talking about a player that's only played 3 years of college football, period. You know, and there's other guys going into their 7th year where they've actually played, you know, and it was a good thing, you know, they could avoid going to court and working through the legal system. They worked directly through the NCAA and got it done. So that's good. He's a really good player. I agree with Shane Beamer that the running backs room is good anyway. They got depth. They got players there. It's not like last year, if they would have been missing Rocket Sanders, this is not the equivalent of that as far as how it would have impacted the offense, but it can help in a good way because he's got a lot of ability to do a lot of things, catching the ball, you know, getting yards down the field. He's elusive, quick feet, runs powerfully, really good back. So I think that there's a lot to be excited about with him being eligible.
Again, talking to JC Shurburt of the BigSpur.com on the AAA Heating and Air phone lines. And now it does beg the question of how deep into this running back room do we go, not only this weekend, but as the season goes along, because obviously Faison's going to be, you know, your 1A running back. And, you know, we're going to see Oscar Attaway, you know, like he did last year, you know, giving some relief to Rocket Sanders. Seems like Isaiah Gustave's really impressed in camp so far. Beamer noted he had the best run of camp with an explosive touchdown a few weeks ago in one of the scrimmages. But then it's like, okay, do you go to Jordan Howell? Do you bring Matthew Fuller in? Like, how deep can you really go? Because last year was kind of a consistent rotation of 2 to 3. Do they feel like all these guys deserve to be on the field? I think that's what we're intrigued to see play out starting this weekend as the season goes along.
Yeah, and a lot of that depends on game flow and, things like that. Obviously, the bench gets shorter the closer the game is in football. Last year I thought Marquell Blackwell did a really good job of, when you have Rocket Sanders, you use Rocket Sanders, right? And they did a good job with him last year, and then Oscar would come in and spell him, and you saw Howell get in some. And then they'd have Juju McDowell in for a couple of plays here and there. But, this year I think they'll go a little deeper, as far as maybe 3. I have not seen but one team really go 4 deep, like the whole year, and that was Georgia in 2021. And I thought Todd Monken did just a fantastic job designing an offense to where, you've got 4 pretty good ones. They all do different things well. They have a little bit different of a style, but they're not going to tip the play when you put them in. And that's the only time I've really ever seen it done, that well. Alabama in 2017 in the national championship game, they had Najee Harris come off the bench. He was their 4th team running back at the time. So in that situation, they went deep. They also played their backup quarterback and won the game against Georgia that year. But it's rare that you can realistically do that unless you're running some 2-back sets, things like that, which, you can't really rule out. I think Mike Shula did some of that with the Panthers. But I think it'd be hard to rotate more than 3 realistically, and most of the time I think you'll see the majority of the carries go to 2. I mean, there's a lot of players on this team that can make plays, and you want to be balanced and all that. You have a running quarterback too, which eats into the carries for the running back. So I think it'll be a little bit more of a rotation than last year, but I don't think you're going to see 4 or 5.
Well, no matter who's running the ball, you obviously got to have the lanes to run through. And the offensive line, we were hoping to maybe learn a little bit more about yesterday with the release of a depth chart, which we unfortunately didn't really get. But we can kind of piece together what we think the offensive line is going to be, including maybe Shed Surratt starting at one of those guard spots. But it's been a consistent issue in the Beamer era. The offensive line has never quite lived up to the billing of what we hoped it could be in the offseason. So why, if any reason, could it potentially be better this year, in your opinion?
Well, I always say this. It's never going to be perfect on the offensive line. And when you're playing in the SEC and you have a team like Clemson on the schedule every year, those are the best defensive lines in the country. Even the quote-unquote best offensive lines in the league. LSU is an example last year. Once they got into league play, the Alabama game, they gave up a bunch of sacks. I remember the last time Georgia lost a home game was to Carolina, and the Gamecocks defensive line against an offensive line with a lot of NFL guys on it. Gamecocks defensive line beat them up pretty good that day and won the game. So those types of things are going to happen. What I think most Gamecock fans and people would like to see is to take a step forward, because they should have been better and more consistent last year. The good news is when you look at personnel, they're all huge. This is probably the biggest offensive line South Carolina is going to have that I can remember. Josiah Thompson is no longer a true freshman. Casey Henry or Tree at right tackle. Both those guys are in their 4th and 3rd year. Shed Surratt's a true freshman, but for him to beat out all those other guys, that just means he's the best one. I think they got kind of a unicorn with that guy, like an unexpected dude that's too good to keep off the field. Boaz Stanley's 325 pounds, 6'5". He's played a lot of ball. Trevon Ball reshaped his body this offseason. And then you got depth. So South Carolina, you never know. Like I said, it's never going to be perfect. But if you're going to go to war, give me guys in their 3rd year, 4th year that are 320, that have reshaped, that are athletic, and let's just see what happens. So I learned long ago never to overpromise on the offensive line with anybody. But I think if they can take a step forward and be competitive and all that, and consistency is very important, and getting the mental part of it down can really make you look bad up front. So I feel good about those parts of everything, talent, mental side of it, taking a step forward, but we'll just have to see. I think there's reasons for optimism, but you never know till you kick it off.
Well, as Boomer alluded to, we'll actually see the depth chart on Sunday about 30 minutes before the game and go from there. We'll dive into that matchup against Virginia Tech coming up next as JC Shurburt of the Big Spur joins me as the halftime show rolls along, presented by the Men's Clinic of South Carolina on your Wednesday on the Game. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show presented by the Men's Clinic of South Carolina. Tyler Head, Captain Dave, along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. I believe our call with JC Shurburt dropped, so we'll get him back on the AAA Heat and Air phone lines here in just a second and continue on our conversation as we get you set for Carolina and Virginia Tech coming up on Sunday. Again, you'll be able to listen to pregame coverage starting that morning with Gamecocks Game Day, myself and Terry Ford at 10 a.m., and we'll lead you right in network coverage at noon, which, of course, leads you up until things get kicked off at 3 o'clock there from Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. And as we look into that matchup, JC Shurburt back on the AAA, hitting our phone lines from thebigspur.com. You know, Carolina's favored in this game. I think when you look and compare these two rosters, Carolina's got a lot of special talent that's going to hopefully give them some advantages. But as I alluded to earlier in the show, Carolina has struggled in the first game of the year more often than not in the Beamer era. And this is a team that, while they're not the best on paper, and, you know, they had their struggles last year certainly, if you give them enough windows, they will make you pay for it. And that is something that makes me a little uneasy going into this weekend, just knowing that the first game's not always been the best for Coach Beamer coach teams.
I mean, yeah, the last three have not been what you would call stellar. I mean, that win over Georgia State in 2022, they got outgained, I think 311 to 288 in that one, and needed a couple of block punts and actually trailed. That's the only time in an opener the last 10 years, with the exception of 2016, that they have not scored a touchdown in the first quarter. So that was an interesting game, to say the least. But you know what? Every team's different. Last year's game against Old Dominion was quite a struggle. Carolina certainly kind of got up 16-7 and then hit a wall. You know, that's a big key to this season, I think, is to keep the consistency going in games. I mean, teams are going to counterpunch. But, you know, it's obviously something that exists because we know the results of the games. But the question is, what were the reasons? You know, why did they struggle with Old Dominion last year? Was it because they had a first-time starter at quarterback and he did not have – that was probably his worst game of the year by a long shot. Well, he's a returning starter this year. He's played the whole season. You know, how much of 2023 was because of the offensive line and giving up 9 sacks? Well, they should have answers there this year. That kind of thing. But you never know. I mean, trends are trends, and certainly I think the Gamecocks are going to be wanting to break the trend. But, you know, as I've kind of dived into Virginia Tech a little bit, you know, they're not really the same that they used to be. And then really hadn't been that way for a while. They have a lot of question marks as well. They have a lot of new players. One of the differences is most of their new players are first-year guys that just got to Blacksburg. You know, a lot of Carolina's new starters are guys like Fred Johnson who have played there, you know, been in the program for a while. Montel Goodwine is a potential starter. He's been in the program. You know, they didn't start last year, didn't maybe have the snaps, but they've at least been around, and that helps with continuity. So I think Carolina roster-wise and quarterback-wise is in a good spot, you know, to kind of shake off the first game cobwebs. But it is a first game, and you can ask anybody in college football, they don't always go. They're usually not your best one. So you don't want to peak in game one anyway. So I expect a competitive football game, at least for a while, though the more I break it down and actually look at what's going to be lining up across from Carolina, the more confident I get in this one, because it's just Virginia Tech has probably more questions than I thought even like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Well, and, you know, going back to, you know, things that are obviously going to hopefully be better this year, you wrote on thebigspur.com just the other day your 10 keys for a good season, and one of them are drive killers be gone in terms of, like, not turning the ball over, which was a consistent problem last year. Sellers obviously had his problems hanging on to the ball, and we certainly hope that's something that's been corrected in this offseason. But, again, you look at a team like Virginia Tech that if you're giving them short fields to work with, they can really make you pay. You can find yourself in a tough situation late in the game. So that's certainly something we hope right out of the gate we can see a big difference in from a year ago.
Absolutely. I mean, Sellers has to hold on to the ball this year. That was when you kind of looked at, things as he progressed through the season, turning the ball over, especially when he's running it and fumbling it. That's something that those are drive killers. People talk about the Illinois game, and there's a million different explanations as to why Carolina suffered an upset loss in that one. One of the big ones, and Shane Beamer mentioned it after the game, was they when they drive it down the field and had an opportunity to score, a lot of times they didn't. They just came away with no points, and that's how you're going to get upset, is when you don't take advantage of those opportunities. And so red zone is going to be important. And I was listening to Brent Pry, the Virginia Tech head coach, and he addressed the media yesterday, and he talked about how they had really bought into red zone offense and defense and sold out to it, at working that part of it, because it's so critical in the game. I mean, because it could demoralize your defense and special teams and everybody. Offense gets a big drive, makes the plays to get down there, and you come away with no points, either because you turn it over, or you don't convert on a fourth down, or you miss a field goal. It's very important to come away with points. That's what determines the winner and loser, obviously. So that's going to be a big part of it for sure. And then individually, of course, Sellers and everybody else being, more sure-handed with the ball and not fumbling and, interceptions and things like that.
Yeah, a couple more minutes here with JC Shurburt of thebigspur.com. You mentioned, J.R. Johnson a moment ago, and he's somebody that has created a lot of buzz in the offseason as he steps in to some pretty big shoes left behind by that, linebacker core last year, as well as Sean Murphy and Justin Okoronkwo. Is he maybe your guy, or is there somebody else in particular that we don't know a lot about yet from an actual in-game standpoint that you're most intrigued to watch on Sunday?
I think, for me personally, Fred would probably take the cakes there. I've been pretty high on him for a while, and here's the thing too. I mean, Fred Johnson is 6'3", 245 pounds, and can run. I mean, there's a reason that he got in camp. They recruited him harder than just about anybody. I mean, he's got size and speed, and those guys are rare at linebacker. I mean, your blue bloods are usually the schools, or quote unquote blue bloods are the schools that get guys like that. He's a Virginia native. His recruitment came down to Virginia Tech and South Carolina. They tried to flip him the entire time. So, that's going to be a big game for Fred. And I think it could be one where it could be a coming out party. But he's also a first-time starter at linebacker in his first game. I'm sure there'll be some butterflies given who they're playing and the stage it's on. And when linebackers make mistakes, they look like they're playing slow and things like that. So it wouldn't surprise me either if Fred Johnson, played good, but his best football continues to come week after week since he is kind of working his way in. But I'm very excited and intrigued. There's others too on offense and defense, but if I had to name one, it would be Fred Johnson. I probably should not talk about Fred Johnson enough like I do, because I'm worried I'm going to jinx it, or if he's not like Lawrence Taylor, I'm going to get criticized.
Right.
I'm kind of ridiculous about it, but yes, I think that guy's going to be a stud. And
you're consistent with calling him Fred. I know we've kind of gone back and forth. He apparently doesn't care. We can call him JR too, but you're sticking with Fred.
Well, I have a rule. If I don't know him personally, I'm not going to call anybody by nickname.
Okay.
There's podcasters and stuff in our market that like to do that, and they don't know those guys personally. So I kind of took a page out of their book and balled it up and threw it in the fire. Said I'm not going to do it. So, but I sometimes talk differently than other people. So maybe just let me be me. I don't hold it against anybody that calls it JR, but I usually just go with what's on the roster. But then there's if I can pronounce it or not too.
Sure.
Some of these names now I've had to go back and learn in my old age. But yeah, I call him Fred. Fred Johnson's a heck of a linebacker name too. Heck, J.R. Johnson is too. Those are both outstanding linebacker names.
They both absolutely work, and we're excited to see them on Sunday. And we'll hopefully have some good things to talk about this time next week. Appreciate it, JC.
Hey, thanks, man. Have a good one.
Hey, you too. JC Shurburt of thebigspur.com. We'll come back, wrap up today's edition of the Halftime Show presented by the Men's Clinic of South Carolina. ESPN not keen on the name Farmageddon from this past weekend. We'll dive into that next as we wrap up the halftime show here on the game. All right, welcome back in. It is the halftime show presented by the Men's Clinic of South Carolina. Tyler Head along with you, wrapping up today's edition of the show. Captain Dave producing on the other side of the glass. Of course, we got our appetizer of college football this past weekend with Week 0 games. highlighted by Kansas State and Iowa State over in Ireland, which truly kicked things off at noon this past Saturday. But if you watch the broadcast of this game, you may have noticed a certain word or phrase that was absent throughout it, and even in the build-up to the game as well. That word being farmageddon, which is the unofficial name of this rivalry between Kansas State and Iowa State. Well, as it turns out, Reese Davis of ESPN detailed just yesterday, I believe on the podcast that he and Pete Thamel have, that ESPN executives were mandating, or the collection of ESPN, and I believe the schools themselves, were trying to push away from the rivalry being referred to that way. Cut number 14, Dave, here from today's list. Dave, here's Reese Davis detailing that.
You know, we got a directive that the powers that be, I guess, for the institutions and perhaps from the conference, they weren't big fans of that moniker of Farmageddon. And I don't really understand why, because when something that's not a rivalry historically that's at the forefront of the college football consciousness, and you have a really cool name like that, it's not meant in a derisive way. It's a fun way, because you just mentioned that's in their DNA. It's part of their charter. It's what they and they've done wonderful and magnificent things in that field, and it becomes a fun way to identify the game. And you know, hopefully people won't send emails like that anymore, and take away things that make it memorable.
Nobody hates fun more than the people in charge, right? And particularly that's the case when it comes to college football. And whether that's a combination of these universities, ESPN, or the conference itself in the Big 12, they tried to prevent Farmageddon from continuing to be a thing. Again, that's how we all refer to it. It's fun. Again, it's not demeaning in any way to either one of the schools. In fact, as Reese Davis pointed out, it celebrates the history of what those schools in those areas of the country do best when it comes to farming and agriculture. That's what we know the Midwest to be great about. And this name is endearing to that in this game played between Kansas State and Iowa State this past weekend. But this isn't a new thing. This has been an ongoing problem in college football for many, many years. These great long-standing names of rivalries, or just things in general that we love to say and use in our usual conversations about the sport that we love, are trying to be squashed for things that are more acceptable. Think of the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. That is not allowed to be set on TV by anybody these days, of course, referring to the game between Georgia and Florida. And I remember a decade ago, they tried to get River City Showdown to become the new name of it, which sounds like an adult league softball tournament, not a football game played between two bitter rivals in the SEC. Go a little bit further. How about the Civil War out there in Oregon? Now, Civil War, I guess, can have connotations, you know, in terms of American history and stuff like that people may not like quite as much, but it was something that was used harmlessly between the rivalry between Oregon and Oregon State. That's gone out the window now. The Red River Shootout. Yes, the Red River Shootout, the rivalry between Texas and Oklahoma that gets played every single year in the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, also has had its name changed to the Red River Rivalry, Red River Showdown, or whatever it may be, trying to steer away from the implication of shootout, you know, in reference to things like guns and stuff like that. And again, I can understand the initial thought process of what they're trying to do in making these changes, but I don't think anybody looks at the name Red River Shootout and suddenly, you know, implies gun violence or something along those lines. I don't think anybody looks at Farmageddon and implies whatever kind of negative connotation they think it applies to, you know, those respective schools. And maybe think it's beneath them to have a rivalry be referred to something like that, but it's fun. It's what makes college football fun, and it's, again, the way we talk about these games and these rivalries anyway. And here's the problem when you do something like this, especially when something like this gets out from, you know, Reese Davis at ESPN telling the world that, hey, this is what they told us about what we're not supposed to say about this game. It only reinforces the support for it, right? Things happen organically, and to my knowledge, the nickname Farmageddon happened organically. So when you try and crush that and prevent it from being said, well, guess what? More people are going to say it, and more people are going to push against you, pushing back on this being the name that you refer to a rivalry as. And at the end of the day, what does it harm? What does it hurt? How does it take away your viewership on TV? Does it make anybody look at your schools any differently because because this name's not associated with it? No, it should, or at least it shouldn't, right? And it's insane to me that with all these other things going on in the college sports, it's things like this they get focused on and saying, hey, make sure they don't call this game Farmageddon. Make sure they don't call it the cocktail party. Make sure they don't call it the Civil War. Make sure they don't call it the Red River Shootout. And the list goes on and on. These aren't just the only examples that I come up with. It's just the ones for purposes of this argument that I, decided to jot down. But it's ridiculous things like this that become such, get focused on too much, when there are plenty of other things in college football that deserve more attention and more resources into fixing them, as opposed to making sure that people don't refer to your rivalry by name that you don't like or don't think is becoming of your schools. So my message, as it will always be to the people that run college football, lighten up. We're just trying to have fun. And if we want to call the rivalry between Kansas State and Iowa State Farmageddon, by God, that's exactly what we're going to do. That'll do it for the halftime show presented by the Men's Clinic of South Carolina. Coming up next, it is the postgame show with Jay and Terry as your Wednesday rolls along here on The Game.